haven't checked the weather yet, but I know it is the perfect day to chat about adult Jewish literature. I'm Cheryl Stahl. Thanks for joining me here at Nice Jewish Books. All right, today I am so pleased to welcome Don Futterman, the author of Adam Unrehearsed. I thought that Adam was one of the most realistic and engaging young characters I've read in a while. So, welcome, Don, and would you please tell me about him in your book?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for those kind words. Adam Unrehearsed is a coming-of-age comedy. It's about a 12-year-old boy in New York in 1970 and 71 during the year of the run-up to his Bar Mitsvah. And Adam, during this year, in addition to preparing for his Bar Mitzvah, goes through a lot of unexpected things, losing some of his close friends quite inexplicably. And at the same time, he also runs afoul of several different gangs. So he's having his first encounters with feeling unsafe, with violence, also his first run-ins with anti-Semitism on a personal level, hearing for the first time in his life anti-Semitic epithets, but also his synagogue is vandalized repeatedly. And during this year, he also falls in love with acting. He's in a drama class. He goes to a public school in New York. This is a story about a boy who's got a strong Jewish identity, but he's not Orthodox. He's in a conservative synagogue, and he has a very ethnically mixed group of friends from his school, from his neighborhood. And during this year, he discovers the stage. He discovers theater. He discovers acting, discovers performing. So in a sense, he's spent much of this year in rehearsal for a play that he's putting on in school and for other theater exercises that he's required to do for his class, and also rehearsing for his bar mitzvah. And he has a very kind of boisterous, larger-than-life cantor who has a big voice that fills up the room. And Adam is a small, skinny kid. He's a smart kid. He's in the smart class in school. And New York City had a program where you could for the gifted students, where they could go through junior high school, which in those days was 7th, 8th, and 9th grades. You could do it in 2 years. So you'd go straight from 7th to 9th grade, and he was in that 2-year program. So he's kind of surrounded by other bright kids, and they're all together and somewhat isolated from the rest of the school because they have most of their classes by themselves. But theater is this whole other world for Adam, where he can get out of his head, where he gets to try to be somebody else, where he gets to be figures who are very different from him, and also where their life experience is different from him. And that really is kind of his solace during what is a otherwise very difficult and demanding year. But the book's also a lot about friendship. And Adam, in the course of the novel, develops some unexpected friendships, friends kind of materializing in places that he wouldn't have necessarily anticipated at the beginning of the year. So he goes through a lot of changes, it's really he's coming of age and beginning to grow up and starting to understand a lot more about the world now that he's turning 13 and because of things that he's going through.
Yeah, you mentioned some of these, and there are actually a lot of different social issues that run through the theme. And I think that you wove them in really, really well without it sounding pedantic and preachy. It's like, look what's going on.
Thank you.
One of those issues were Black-Jewish relations and how it was kind of intertwined with upward mobility. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. He is kind of startled to hear the first anti-Semitic derogatory epithets coming out of the mouths of Black teenagers. And from what he knows, he's in a very liberal family, big believers in civil rights, very proud of the progress America's making in the 60s and 70s on the civil rights front. And he kind of takes it for granted that Jews and Blacks are together, that they're allies and they have common cause. And so he's particularly shocked to hear Black kids saying derogatory things about Jews. And later there's a black character who isn't saying anything anti-Semitic, but who Adam at first feels somewhat threatened by, and they have kind of a dance that goes on throughout the course of the novel, where he tries to kind of understand what this kid is going through. I don't want to have any spoilers here, but there is a sense of the dynamics that are going on politically are affecting these kids in ways they can't quite see. This other boy's a little bit older, a couple of years older than Adam, but both of them are the children of teachers. Adam's parents are a teacher and a school principal. And 1970 was 2 years after a very bitter teacher strike in New York City, which on a certain level ended up pitting the Jewish community against the African American community in the city, because the strike was about the desire by activists in some predominantly African American communities to have more control over their schools and to have more control over choosing the principal, choosing the teachers. And the teachers, the public school system, had a very high percentage of Jewish teachers, and the United Federation of Teachers in New York, the teachers union, was also led by Albert Shanker, who was kind of a mythical figure who was Jewish, and had a lot of Jews who were at the head of that. And Jews kind of got into the teaching profession after World War II, partly through the GI Bill. It was a profession that was open to Jews. It was a way to move up solidly into the middle class, and a lot of Jews followed suit. So I had Adam's parents as characters both be in that educational world and still kind of dealing with the reverberations of that teacher strike, even though it was 2 years before. And one of the things that I discovered more in research, I lived through it as a kid, but as a kid, I just remember that there was a strike. We didn't have school for weeks and weeks and weeks, and we were not complaining about that. We still had Hebrew school. So in the middle of the day, we had to go to Hebrew school, even though we were free the rest of the day. But we, so I wasn't really aware of this as a kid. And my parents were not educators. This is not based on my life, but this is what I discovered was that was considered one of the turning points in the breakdown of the Jewish-Black alliance, that teacher strike, because it kind of, and again, it's still debated, I think, till today, about whether it was the communities were being manipulated, set one against the other, or that was a way to try to gather support or to play off fears of the Jews and the teachers union that they were going to be losing their jobs, or to pit these communities who were both minority communities trying to establish themselves in New York and trying to gain more influence and power at that time so that they would not threaten other communities that already had more control. So it's a complicated time. And there were a lot of unpleasant incidents that happened at that time that had reverberations for many years afterwards. So I touch on those things. Again, it's not a sociology book. It's not a history book. So those things are kind of happening in the background. And you see how it's impacting the kids. And it's impacting on things that they hear or things that adults are saying that they don't completely understand. But it shows some of the fears and suspicions the community had of each other. The Jews, American Jews at the time, I think, I would say that when I was growing up, and Adam is essentially the age I was, so I was drawing on my personal experience for what was happening in that period in that sense. That was really the first generation that felt completely secure in America, completely accepted. I remember as a kid, I felt utterly American and proud of that and very proud of being Jewish. And I didn't see any conflict there. And when my parents would tell me to be on my best behavior when I was in public, to make sure that I never did anything that would give Jews a bad name or a bad image if I was in front of non-Jews, I thought they were paranoid. I thought, what are they talking about? We're all the same. We're all just here together. And that was certainly something their generation didn't feel. And certainly my grandparents' generation, the immigrants' generation didn't feel that at all. So I think we felt very secure. And again, because I was in public school, I wasn't in Jewish day school. So I was very much mixing with everybody all the time. We felt we were all in this boat together. We were all part of things. So I think Adam gets a little bit blindsided when he first encounters anti-Semitism at all, and then coming from the Black community particularly catches him off guard. But there was in the Jewish community certain prejudices, and there was certainly racism as well, even though there was liberal ideals, and sometimes different parts of the community, sometimes different parts of the same person. So I tried to address that again somewhat lightly, but that's happening as well. And Adam's got to contend with suspicions he hears from other people, sometimes from Jews, sometimes from other African Americans who are themselves nervous about different people in their own community. And he's trying to juggle and navigate all that. And, I think at that age, when you're an adolescent and then through your teen years, you're trying to put it together. You're trying to figure out the adult world. So that's this one part of the adult world that's particularly confusing. But it's in a bigger dynamic that's going on for him in the course of the book, because the book is a comedy. And part of what creates that comedy, besides that adolescence when you're not living through it, is actually a very funny time. If you look back on it, but he's also trying to figure out how does he stand out and blend in at the same time? Because as a kid, you want to do both. You want to be just like everybody else, but you also want to be special. So how do you do that?
Absolutely.
And being on stage, whether it's in an acting class or on the bima in your synagogue or your shul, are ways that you stand out, where you're in the spotlight. And then you can fall back afterwards and blend in with all the crowd or with your friends. And he's trying to figure that out. And he has a number of different mentors in the book. The cantor is one of them. His older brother is another. His parents, his acting teacher, they're all kind of mentor figures, but they're all kind of glomming onto a different aspect of Adam. Some of them are seeing Adam as a younger version of themselves, and some of them are seeing Adam as a kid who's very different than themselves. And there's confusion there as well, because sometimes the adults are having their own experience and the kid doesn't realize what's going on for them. But as a kid, especially Adam is a bright kid, he's a good kid, he's used to doing well at school, he's used to getting a lot of positive reinforcement. He's trying to keep everybody happy, but he's also trying to figure out what it takes to keep them all satisfied. What do all these adults want from him? And what does he have to do, both to keep them happy, but also to be content himself? And sometimes there's a conflict between what the adults want and what he wants, and he has to figure out how to navigate that as well.
This is all kind of in the background of his relationship with Michael, the slightly older black boy that you mentioned. And he kind of wants to connect, but it's really hard for him to give Michael the benefit of the doubt because of the experiences he's had with some members of the black community. It just makes it that much harder to connect as a person.
Well, he's also, Michael's a little older. He also has kind of an attitude of coolness, and he smokes cigarettes and things which are completely taboo to Adam, but he's also drawn to that. It's a little bit of the forbidden side. And he's inventing in his mind all kinds of fantasies about Michael and Michael's life, because he doesn't really know him. And later he'll find out that Michael's a lot more like him than he thinks. They have a lot in common. Although Adam's in the high achievers class in school, and Michael's in the low achievers class in the same school. And that's something that also is confusing to Adam, because as he does get to know him, he realizes that this guy is very bright. This guy is very creative. So that also opens questions to him, especially as a kid who's always been judged, appreciated, evaluated by how well he does in school. He gets high marks, and that's part of his identity. And here's a kid who gets low marks, which is certainly part of his identity as well. But how does that affect the rest of him? And that, opens, I think Adam learns a lot about challenging his own preconceptions in the course of the novel, which is part of growing up. It was changing your assumptions about people. He meets another friend who's from a recently arrived, it's an Indian family originally, but who has been living in England for many years. And the boy is Adam's age, and he was born and raised in England. And they've recently immigrated to New York. And here's another kid coming from a very different world than Adam. And they also make a connection. So, Adam is kind of getting out of his comfort zone of his original core group of friends. And now Adam's friends weren't all Jewish. He had a very mixed group of friends. But he's meeting new kids who are outside of the world that he's familiar with. And that's also causing him to open up a little bit.
Well, and that was sort of a consequence of his best friend ghosting him and
Yeah.
telling all the other gang of friends not to talk to him. And we don't find out till the very end what the misunderstanding was, because was it Jacob? Never said
Jason. Yeah, Jason.
what.
Right.
Jason, sorry,
Right.
never told him. Why
Right.
did you do this? So, but that gave Adam an opportunity, or it forced him to find friends elsewhere. And most of the school was already kind of divided into cliques and groups. So his choices were the other misfits and outcasts, which led him to Suvan.
Right. So that's exactly right. He experienced something that's actually really common in school. I run a education organization, and we work in low-income elementary schools, and we run an annual writing competition for kids in 3rd through 6th grades by grade. And every year we get dozens of stories, sometimes more than that, of kids writing about being ostracized in school, in their class. Usually it's girls. It happens much more commonly among girls at this age, but sometimes boys. And the boys sometimes are even crueler than the girls when they do it. So in the book, that it's exactly what you described. Because he's kind of ostracized by his own gang that he's been with through most of elementary school. Now they're in junior high school, and suddenly he's on the outs with most of them, not all of them, but most of them. And he doesn't really know why. And usually in cases of ostracism, the kids don't really understand why it happened either, or it's not clear to them. But that puts Adam in a position where he has to talk to other kids. He's not in his clique anymore. He's also at a new school, which is much bigger, which is much less familiar and homey than the school he was in for all of elementary school. And so it's all somewhat intimidating. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to meet other people. It's an opportunity to pay more attention to kids that he has known for a long time, but who were never in that first circle because he had a very tight first circle. And now that he's been pushed out of that circle, suddenly it's like, okay, there are these other kids. And he also, I think, becomes aware of how it must have been for some of those other kids when he wasn't paying attention to them in earlier times when they might wanted to be closer friends to him. But he had his clique. So he was, he's a particularly nice kid. So he's not the kind of kid who's going to be nasty to them, but he won't pay them too much, give them too much of his time. And now suddenly he's like, oh, wait a second. Maybe this is what they felt like all these years. I mean, also the issue of what it's like for a kid to be aware. When he was in elementary school, there were very few black kids in the class. And he realized that some of those kids probably felt like outsiders. I mean, he kind of knew that in the past as well. He was aware enough of that because he could see how they were being treated by other kids, and he would go out of his way to behave differently. But now suddenly he's experiencing it, and that's very different. And I think that also is one of the dynamics I'm trying to explore a little bit here in the novel, where issues come in of the group that feels that they're helping someone else, but the other group might feel they're being condescended to, and that's, if you're not in equal status, then it's very hard to find the right dynamics. So when he makes friends with Michael, which is a kind of a difficult, challenging friendship all the way through, right to the end of the book, and partly because Michael's kind of a quirky guy. It's not so straightforward and so simple for him either. But that's also part of the challenge of growing up, is starting to deal with people who are more complex. And maybe they don't want you to try to figure them out. Maybe they just want you to be there as a friend without understanding everything they do or why they do it. So it's again, a lot of these things are, I think, what you go through in adolescence and as a teenager and sometimes into your early 20s as well, trying to figure out social dynamics. But, here it's beginning, or you're beginning to be aware of it. You've been doing it your whole life, truthfully, because kids have dynamics even when they're very young, even younger than this. But they're always going on. But you become more aware of them and become more aware that you have a role in impacting how these things play out.
One other theme in the book is Adam's brother Seth involved in a group to free Soviet Jewry. So can you talk about what was going on with that at the time?
Well, I mean, Seth is a member of Beitar, which is a militant Zionist youth movement, and they're involved with protest actions on behalf of Soviet Jewry. Now, I think what was happening, I mean, to circle back to what we talked about earlier, the American Jewish community also was feeling more confident. I mean, 1970, 71, this is 3-4 years after the Six-Day War. So we're still kind of riding the high of the pride in Israel and its power, in the sense that Jews can have power as well. I remember big posters in our house that my brother put up of Jewish power that were kind of modeled on Black Power posters, and a lot of Soviet Jewry posters and buttons that we had in the house, because my brother was in Beitar, although Seth is somewhat modeled on him, not exactly him. And this is Adam's first experience of any kind of social action, of any kind of political action. And I mean, it's also the time of Vietnam, so the country is very divided over Vietnam. Kent State, it's a couple of years after the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy. So there's, also a sense of kind of on one side of things falling apart, and on the other side, the year before we'd landed on the moon, there was a sense we could do anything. And they were both existing at the same time and pulls in two different directions. But this is the first time Adam learns about the Soviet Jewry movement, is reading a book by Elie Wiesel, and there's The Jews of Silence. And there's another book that plays a central role in the novel, because Adam stages a version of Elie Wiesel's novel Dawn, a short novel about a young survivor who's asked to guard a police sergeant who's been captured, taken prisoner by the underground, because the British are planning to execute members of the underground at dawn. And if the British don't free those prisoners, they're going to execute this guy at dawn too. And this young man, Elisha, is the one given that job to watch him for the night, and if he doesn't get a word otherwise, to execute him at dawn, which is quite a thing to ask for a teenage survivor. So Adam is he's staging that book as a play, but he's also read the book The Jews of Silence, so he learns about Soviet Jews. And I think American Jews at that moment felt confident enough to have our own political cause. Now, here we were in the middle of the fight about Vietnam and civil rights and urban discord, all kinds of things going on in the country. Nixon was president. It was a very unsettled time. But the American Jewish community felt like, hey, we were too passive during the Holocaust, or we didn't have enough influence during the Holocaust. But now we're established. Now we're strong. Now we're here. Now we have a strong Israel. We have our own country also. But we can make a statement in America, and we can lead the fight to free the Jews of the Soviet Union. And that was really unprecedented for American Jewry to take such a public stand on an issue that was particular to the Jewish community, not just the American Jewish community, obviously to the global Jewish community. But American Jews took a really important leadership role in that whole struggle and that whole battle. You hear it from the people who back then were refuseniks, like Anatoly Sharansky, today Natan Sharansky, who's here in Israel and became the Speaker of the Knesset and ran the Jewish Agency, and wrote a wonderful book with my friend Gil Troy about 9 years in the Gulag, 9 years in the Knesset, and 9 years in the Jewish Agency, about these very different parts of his life. But for us, that was also a place where we had Solidarity Sunday, and tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Jews would gather, in Manhattan in protests. And eventually we also had the Salute to Israel Day Parade. These were these big public events where the whole Jewish community of New York City came out and made their presence felt, and that was pretty new, at that time. So I think Adam gets kind of brought into this through his brother, who's 5 years older. So he's much more politically aware, and he's about to deal with what he's going to do if he gets drafted for Vietnam. And Adam's he's 12 or 13. These aren't immediate issues for him yet. But this is his only brother, his only sibling. So he is actually forced to think about these things. My own brother was in Beitar back in those days. I eventually joined Young Judea, so I was in a different youth movement, but that became very central to my life afterwards.
So you mentioned that this is a lot of comedy in the book, and a lot of that comes from the cantor, who, as you said, is a real larger-than-life character.
Yeah.
Can you talk about him and the influence he has on Adam and on the other kids in the Bar Mitzvah class?
Well, he kind of takes Adam under his wing as his special project, and he knows that,
much to Adam's dismay.
Yes, initially Adam is not very happy about this, and Adam is not much of a singer, but he has been going to junior congregation through most of elementary school. So he is used to being on the bima and leading the service to some degree, but a service for kids. And at his bar mitzvah, he's going to be asked to do this in the main sanctuary, which is a different building. It's a fancy, new, modern building made of glass and steel and stone, and it's much more intimidating. And unlike most of the kids who are going to do the Haftorah, they'll read their Haftorah, they'll learn the brachot to say before and after the Haftorah. That was sort of the standard practice back in conservative shuls in the day. The cantor encourages Adam to lead the entire service, to learn to read the entire Torah reading, and to lead the tefillah, to lead the prayer services as well as the shaliach tzibur. And here's a kid who's not much of a singer. I mean, he can lead a little bit in junior congregation, but now he's got to do it in front of everybody, and he's got to learn, in addition to the Haftorah, he's got to learn how to read the Torah, which is much more difficult because the way it's a different musical notation, and anyone who's ever read from the Torah knows there are no vowels, there's no punctuation, and the musical notation that you have in your book when you're reading the Haftorah isn't there. You've got to memorize it all. You've got to remember exactly where the verses, where the sentences begin and end, and how you sing it. So Adam's got to go through that. And again, I tried to share a little bit of that experience without getting too detailed and bog the reader down, but a little bit of what that's like for a kid to learn that stuff. And I did learn it at that age. I eventually taught it to a lot of other kids, including my own, when I was older. But the cantor kind of adopts Adam, and they spend a lot of time together because he's teaching him so much of the service. And Cantor's a big, strong guy, kind of a bull in a china shop presence, and they develop a very special connection. And the cantor was kind of inspired by the cantor that I grew up with, who was Murray Bazian, Zichrono Livracha. It's not exactly him. Again, none of the characters, even if they are based on someone, and a lot of the characters are wholly invented, but none of them are exactly the people that were their sources of inspiration. But he kind of teaches them a different way of being in the world. I mean, the cantor is also a survivor. He's from Romania in the novel, and went through some very difficult things there, and had to survive in the tough streets of Romania, but also New York City. And he's Orthodox and dresses in black and white with a hat, and stands out and gets hassled for it. But he's not afraid of anybody. And so again, these things attract Adam, even though Adam can't quite play that role. But he's drawn to it. It's another image of being powerful. It's another image of being present. But the cantor is also very spiritual, which, Adam doesn't become particularly religious or spiritual, but he does, through this connection, feel more part of the community. And the cantor has a different take on the Jewish experience because, Adam has grown up until this point in a fairly safe, protected environment. And the cantor has seen a lot more harsh things in his life already. And he doesn't want Adam to have to go through anything similar. But, he's much more pessimistic about human nature based on what he's been through. But he wants to help this kid. And they end up having some adventures, kind of. Adam, the cantor, gets sucked into some of Adam's adventures and vice versa during the course of the novel. So
they play ball during their lessons or after their lessons.
Right. Right. The cantor takes off his socks, and they use the socks as a ball, and they basically playing soccer with a pair of socks, which I did in real life. So that was, but it's another way that they connect. And so he's a very strong influence. And then Adam's acting teacher also connects to him in another way, because Adam turns out to be a very good actor, and acting really opens him up. And then Adam discovers, getting to know the acting teacher, that adults have their own aspirations and dreams, and that adults are not necessarily all locked into what they're doing with their jobs. And this acting teacher wants to be an actor.
Right.
He doesn't want to be a drama teacher. He wants to be an actor off Broadway or on Broadway. So that's also a revelation for him. And they have a whole experience that's going on in parallel as Adam gets more drawn into theater.
Yeah, and you mentioned that earlier, that he was lucky enough to kind of find his people. A lot of people don't find their niche until high school, college, beyond
Right.
college. So he was lucky in that way. So it sounds like you've lived a lot of this, but did you have to do research as well?
Yeah, I mean, I did research on the period, on things that were going on in the Jewish community. Also I read about, Black Jewish relations to African Americans in the Jewish community, what the dynamics were at that time. I read some things about anti-Semitism that was going on. I went back to check the politics too, because I was a kid. I was not that aware of the politics from year to year. So I was trying to make sure that I had some of the right things in the years. A good friend of mine pointed out that I had Adam reading comic books that weren't published in the right year.
Uh-oh.
So we went changed it. We went back and changed it to make sure that everything was exactly right. So he was even more on top of that. I was a kid who was very into comic books, and that's one of the bonds Adam creates with Suvan. They're both fans actually of Sherlock Holmes, and Adam tries to get Suvan interested in comic books, which he finds to be kind of childish, and that's part of it too. It's like what Adam is trying to figure out, what belongs to childhood and what belongs to adulthood. You have comic books on one hand and Playboy on the other hand, and you have real fiction and novels and plays. Which of these things do you take on? So it's so he's trying to navigate all that.
So was there anything in your research that surprised you?
I really didn't know all of the history of the battle over the teacher strike in Ocean Hill-Brownsville and the United Federation of Teachers. I remember that it happened, but I was surprised to discover how bitter that was, and how some of those incidents resonated for years or decades afterwards. And again, there are different interpretations and there's different accounts, and I don't know that one is more persuasive than another of what was going on then. Also, I looked up some, I did some of the research on the Soviet Jewry movement, what was happening in the Soviet Jewry movement at that time. They mentioned the group of Jews who had attempted to hijack a plane to go to Sweden, but they were arrested before they could do this, and several of them were sentenced to death. And that was one of the things that inspired, they were called the Leningrad 14 outcries, to try to at least get the Soviet government to commute those sentences to imprisonment, which is what happened in the end. And in the end, those people got out many years later. But that became a cause, that became a rallying cry, because here were Jews being sentenced to death because they really wanted to just leave and go to Israel, but you couldn't leave the Soviet Union. That was the perfect society. If you were leaving, you were showing that it wasn't perfect, wasn't utopia. And the Jews who had asked permission to leave would lose their jobs and would or be thrown out of university. I did eventually go visit some Soviet Jews in 1981, which was still 6 years before Glasnost, where things completely changed. And saw firsthand what some of them were living through and what they had been living through. So I did some research on that also, just to try to get the times right, that I wasn't writing about things that were happening earlier or later, and try to at least be factually accurate. And the rest was either from my imagination or memory, or when I was writing the book, I also talked to people that I knew then, some of whom I reconnected, today, either through emails, Facebook, whatever, you can find people in ways we didn't used to be able to. And some of them shared their experience of what it was like back then. And some of that I put in the book. Some of that's, there's several stories or incidents that were things that other people told me about that they had lived through or that had happened to them. So that helped fill in some of the background and also give it different perspectives. So and some great stories and anecdotes that are in there.
So is there anything that you would like to talk about that I haven't thought to ask you about?
Well, look, I think this is as we said, it is funny. The book is funny, and I think it's I think also a lot of these identity questions are comical as we try to navigate who we are and try to figure out who we are. And you see this kid's identity developing, through the course of the book. So often in the fiction I read about American Jews when I was growing up, some of which was really brilliant writing, American Jewish institutional life was ridiculed. It was Hebrew school was seen as ridiculous, either backward or just foolish. Bar mitzvahs were often portrayed as just kind of celebrations of materialism, and that was not at all my experience. Now, it doesn't mean I didn't have my own criticisms when I was a kid, and I didn't have my own, pushback against things, and just having to go to Hebrew school 3 more days a week after school and going to junior congregation on Sunday. There were certainly times that I just had enough and, wish I could just be left alone like the other kids who would come home from school and be done. But on the other hand, it was an incredibly enriching second world for me, and hopefully you feel that in the book for Adam as well, that this other world that he has that's particular in the Jewish community gives him a lot. It helps. It's a place where he feels recognized and appreciated. It's a place where his values are formed as well, and where you talk about things like that more than you actually would do in elementary school and public school. And there's a kind of a dialogue going on between these two worlds, because he spends part of his time in this specifically Jewish community, which is for him formative and enriching. And he spends most of his time in the general community, which is the world that he lives in. And I think that gives a lot to him and helps him be able to get ready to deal with adult life much better. He's still, he's only 13 at the end of the book. He's still a kid. And he's very aware of the fact that even though he is considered a man now in the Jewish community, that nothing really is going to change that much in his life. And yet a lot of things have changed. So, it's getting prepared for young manhood. That's what's coming. And he gets that. He gets that. I didn't write this book in the first person because I didn't want to be locked into a 12-year-old's voice. I wanted to be able to go in and out of that 12-year-old view. And hopefully at times you feel it. And sometimes, probably has thoughts that are more appropriate to a slightly older kid. But I wanted to get, he's a bright kid. He's a sensitive kid. He's got good antennae. He picks up a lot of things. And you see him trying to put things together. But I also wanted the chance as the writer to zoom out and either use a authorial, omniscient voice, or here and there, because it's not very much in the book, but here and there to go into the head of one of the other characters, and you get a little more of an adult perspective on things. So hopefully you'll, it's enjoyable and people can fall in love with Adam's journey and his unrehearsed adventures.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I loved were those two perspectives, because a lot of times books which focus on kids have only ineffectual or absent adults, or, actively trying to thwart the kids, and so you have, this cast of supportive adults, so even though they aren't the main focus, they're still there supporting him, while living their lives too.
Right. No, and look, that's part of it. A lot of children's literature is about kids but this is a book for adults, and it's written for adults too. And it's not a story about a kid who's abandoned by adults. He's surrounded by adults. They're sometimes pulling him in different directions. and he's got to figure that out. But, there's a lot of adults that have ultimately good intentions. Now, the adults themselves don't see everything. Each of them has their own set of blinders on. And Adam's got he's starting to notice that. He's starting to notice that adults themselves don't know everything. As a kid, you certainly, when you're a young child, you think your parents know, if you have loving parents, they know everything. Mm-hmm. They have all the knowledge and all the wisdom. They figured it all out. And maybe when you grow up, you'll have it all too, but you certainly don't have it now. But I think at this age, you start to realize, adults are human beings and they're not perfect. And yet they still have a lot to give me, or I have a lot to learn from them. And sometimes I can also disagree with them. I can also push back and I can say, no, that I understand what you're saying, but that's not right. That's not what I'm seeing. And you start to question that and you start to put that to the test in your own life. So I think that's part of what he's doing, especially because he's a kid who adults like. He's a kid that adults connect to for all different reasons. So he's comfortable with adults, and yet he's also aware that they're not equals. I mean, he's very conscious of that, and he's got to figure out what they want and what they want from him. But they're basically well-meaning older mentor figures in the books, although they're different. And each of them hopefully is a very distinct, different character. Even the two parents who are two educators in the same household. And the two parents have very different takes on what's happening in America, what happened to them in the couple of years since the teacher strike. The father is reinforcing his very strong liberal values, and the mother is really questioning them. She was really hurt by what happened during the teacher strike, and she's kind of pulling back away from that and thinking, well, maybe this isn't so right. Maybe we have to be more out just for ourselves. And there's a tension there as well. So, it's again, that was a way I was trying to bring in some of the outside world into Adam's inner world, because I think that's kind of what the book is all about. It's about a kid starting to discover the outside world, and that he has to take a stand sometimes. I mean, not that they're waiting to hear what a 13-year-old has to say about politics in America, but it's affecting him as well. And he's got to figure out where he fits in all this and what he believes in.
So do you have any projects in the works that you would like to mention?
Sure. I have a podcast called Futterman's One Man Show, which are autobiographical monologues kind of done as little audio pieces. So there's 6 episodes up now. We're just finishing the 7th and 8th. Each 2 episodes is kind of one long story. And some of those were adapted from one-man shows I used to do on stage, because I was actually an actor and performer for many years. And some of those are original pieces I've just been writing now. So that you can just find online, or you can go to my website, donfutterman.com. There's some stuff about the book, and eventually I'll have some things about the podcast on there as well. I'm just finishing an audio play, which is also, I'm doing a lot of stuff on radio and podcasts in the last bunch of years. So I'm just finishing a play, and hopefully we'll get that produced as well. And working on the next novel, but I won't talk about that one yet. It's much too early, but hopefully that. And I have two children's books out in Hebrew. So if any of the listeners can read Hebrew, they were both published here in Israel, but for very beginning readers. So, one is 380 words long and one is 700 words long. So these are very short, but with wonderful, wonderful illustrations. I was really blessed to have magnificent illustrators for both of these kids' books.
What are those titles?
One is called Ha'otzar Shel Yaniv, Yaniv's Treasure, and the other is Ad Lamala. Up, it means literally up to the heights, but in English you're calling it up and over. So that one's about a girl who climbs up on a slide, or as we call it in New York City, a sliding pond. She's going up the ladder. I discovered only in New York area do people call it that. If she goes up the ladder and she suddenly gets scared of heights and she freezes on the ladder, and the line of kids behind her grows so long that it causes a traffic jam in the city, and people have to come out, and the mayor comes out to try to encourage her to come down. So that was published by the PJ Library in Hebrew, the Sifrei HaPijama last year. So that was distributed to 140,000 preschoolers in Israel, which is probably by far the widest distribution I'll ever have.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And the other book was put out by Talmai Publishers in Israel as well. So that's also for beginning readers, about two brothers, and they're in preschool, and one of them is trying to increasingly pack up all of his things into his knapsack to take to preschool with him. And every day it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's just no room for it anymore. That's his treasure that he's taking with him every day. So those are children's books I have out as well.
Wonderful. So I like to give everyone a minute soapbox moment to either using your book as a base or just talk about anything you want as a call to action for Tikkun Olam, for repairing the world.
Well, look, right now, obviously, with what's going on in Israel, there's a lot to repair.
We're right about 3 months after October 7th right now.
Right. Yes. And so I'll mention two things. One is the fund for rehabilitation of Kfar Azza, which was one of the kibbutzim that was destroyed, and many members were killed or kidnapped. And I think you can find that through JGive or other platforms. It's Kfar Azza. Azza is the name. It's the name of the village of Azza right outside of Gaza. So that would be one thing. If people are interested in getting involved with it or contributing to it, that would be great. Also, the organization I direct, the Israel Center for Educational Innovation. We work in more than 50 low-income elementary schools, underperforming elementary schools, to turn them around. And we also have a special fund because some of those schools have been dealing with the after effects of the war, or some schools in Ashkelon were getting very heavily attacked by rocket fire for months. So those would be great places if anybody wants to contribute something. There you can do it through the New Israel Fund or PEF or other channels. So those would be great. Okay,
great. I'll put links in the show notes.
Terrific.
And what is the best way to contact you? Would that be through your website?
Yeah. The best way, there's contact information on the website, and it's just my name, Don Futterman. It's with 2 T's, .com, donfutterman.com, and there you'll find me. Or if you need to find my publicist, who's terrific, you can find her as well. And I hope people will read Adam Unrehearsed.
Well, thank you so much, Don Futterman, for speaking with me about Adam Unrehearsed. As I said, one of the most engaging young kids I've read in a long time. And here's hoping for some peace in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. We could use it. Thank you so much.
If you are interested in any of the books we discussed today, you can find them at your favorite board and brick or online bookstore, or at your local library. Thanks to Dianki for use of his Freilich, which definitely makes me happy. This podcast is a project of the Association of Jewish Libraries, and you can find more about it at www.jewishlibraries.org/nicejewishbooks. I would like to thank AJL and my podcast mentor, Heidi Rabinowitz. Keep listening for the promo for her latest episode.
Hi everyone, I'm Martin Lemmelman, the author and illustrator of The Miracle Seed. I'm thrilled to be able to join Heidi in the upcoming Book of Life podcast. I'd like to dedicate my episode to 2 amazing Israeli women, Dr. Sarah Salon of Hadassah Hospital and Dr. Elaine Salaway of the Araba Institute. They created the miracle in my book. For more than 1,000 years, the Judean date palm was extinct. Working with ancient seeds discovered on the fortress of Masada, they brought this special tree back to life.
The Book of Life is the sister podcast of Nice Jewish Books. I'm your host, Heidi Rabinowitz, and I podcast about Jewish Kidlit. Join me to hear my conversation with Martin Lemmelman about the miracle seed at bookoflifepodcast.com.